The best player on earth is being booed. Not after failure, not after a missed penalty, not after a mistake of any kind. The crowd is Brazilian, the stadium is full, and within weeks this same man will hold the Ballon d'Or and FIFA World Player of the Year. Both, in the same breath. The boos don't stop. What's at stake here isn't a trophy, it's a question. How does the greatest player in the world become invisible in the country that made him? To answer that, we have to go back to the beginning, not to a football pitch, to the dirt of Recife. Because if Rivaldo was forgotten, he wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. Recife is not a city football scouts traveled to in the 1980s. It was, and remains, one of Brazil's most economically fractured regions. Unemployment was structural. Poverty was not a backdrop to daily life, it was the architecture of it. And inside it, a boy named Rivaldo Vitor Borba Ferreira grew up without enough to eat. Not as metaphor, as medical fact. Malnutrition left its mark early. He lost teeth as a child. His body, by any conventional measure of what an elite athlete should look like at the start of their story, should not have held up. He had no boots. He played on concrete, on dirt, in the streets. He played because there was no alternative future. But he had a left foot that operated on a different frequency to anyone around him. When football finally noticed, it did what it always does with the truly exceptional. It tested him first. He began at Santa Cruz in Recife, moved to Mogi Mirim, then Corinthians, Palmeiras. He was good, unmistakably, inconveniently good, but Brazilian football already had its center of gravity. Ronaldo Nazario, electric, physical, already mythologized before his 22nd birthday. The narrative architecture of Brazilian football was being constructed around other names. There was a shape being built, and Rivaldo didn't fit inside it. In 1996, Deportivo La Coruña took him to Spain, a mid-table club in Galicia, not the stage most players dream of. He scored 21 league goals in a single season. Barcelona saw enough. In 1997, the biggest club in the world paid $45 million for a malnourished kid from Recife who had learned football on concrete without boots. But before we arrive at the summit, we need to understand what it cost to get there. During his peak years at Barcelona, the same period in which he was winning world awards and producing the most dominant football of his career, Rivaldo's manager stood in front of the press and announced that he would be moved to the left wing. Not quietly, not in a closed dressing room, in print, on record, a public repositioning, removed from the central axis of the attack he had built his entire game around. The board said nothing. The Camp Nou said something. It said it every time he touched the ball. Rivaldo's response was not a press conference, not an agent's statement, not a petition to the board. He scored 34 goals in all competitions that season and won the Ballon d'Or by a distance. Camp Nou, the Ballon d'Or winner, receives the ball. The crowd boos. This is what the machine does to the men it cannot categorize. It does not destroy them outright. That would be too loud. It manufactures doubt. It creates conditions in which a man's achievements feel perpetually provisional. It builds a gap between what a player produces and what he is permitted to receive for it. Rivaldo gave Barcelona the peak years of his career. What Barcelona gave him in return was a public debate about whether he deserved to be there. The boos were not incidental, they were the sound of that gap. He arrived at Barcelona carrying everything Recife had given him: hunger, silence, and a left foot that could not be reasoned with. By the time the Ballon d'Or year arrived, he was the most complete player in La Liga. 24 league goals in a single season, a creator and a finisher simultaneously, a man who could function as the axis of an attack and its sharpest edge, in the same move, in the same breath. Rivaldo, La Liga, 1998-99, 24 goals. Ballon d'Or winner, FIFA World Player of the Year. The football world was beginning to understand what it had, but back home, in the country that produced him, something different was happening. While Rivaldo was winning everything available to him, two other stories were being written. Ronaldo Nazario, already the sport's great redemption story in waiting. Ronaldinho approaching, the smile, the samba, the effortless performance of joy. Both stories were real. Both were beautiful. Both were stories the machine could sell. Rivaldo was too quiet, too internal, too uncomfortable with the performance of fame. He gave nothing to the cameras that wasn't football. And in a country that expects its geniuses to perform their genius publicly, that silence was read as arrogance. In 1999, Rivaldo won the Ballon d'Or. He won FIFA World Player of the Year. Both, same calendar year. The same 12 months in which the loudest noise his own supporters produced when he touched the ball was disapproval. That paradox is not incidental to this story. It is the story. Football was making a calculation. It just hadn't shown its hand yet. And then came the moment that should have ended the argument for good. 21st June 2001, Camp Nou, final day of the La Liga season. Barcelona sat 5th in the table. Valencia, their opponents, were 3rd, 3 points clear. The Champions League place would be decided in 90 minutes. Barcelona needed to win. There was no margin. Rivaldo had carried the attack all game. He scored in the 47th minute. He scored again in the 68th to level. Then, in the 87th minute, with the ball dropping over his shoulder at an angle that logic had no answer for, his back half turned to goal, he produced something that had no rational right to exist. That was not athleticism. That was fury dressed as technique. Barcelona finished 4th. They qualified for the Champions League. He had scored a hat-trick in the final minutes of the final day of the season. The 3rd goal, a bicycle kick of such violence and precision that it is still, by most accounts, the greatest single piece of individual skill ever performed in La Liga. The boos continued the following season. This is where the erasure starts, not with failure, with inconvenience. The machine was not hostile to Rivaldo. It simply had no room for a genius who refused to perform outside the 90 minutes. He had given them the greatest hat-trick in La Liga history. He had given them 2 world awards. He gave them football and only football. That was never going to be enough. Then came 2002, South Korea, Japan, the World Cup. Brazil entered without the easy narrative. Ronaldo was returning from the shadow of the 1998 final. The convulsions, the controversy, the years of injury. The story being written was his. The cameras were trained on his comeback. Rivaldo was 30 years old. He was operating at the heart of everything the narrative chose to look past. And he understood, in a way he had never stated publicly, but which his actions made plain, exactly what this tournament was and what it was not going to be about. 2002 World Cup, Brazil. The story is already written. Ronaldo's comeback. Rivaldo's footnote. Against Turkey in the group stage, he scored the equaliser, a first-time volley from the edge of the box, and then converted the penalty to win it. But there was another moment in that Turkey match, one this documentary will not pretend away. After the final whistle, Turkish midfielder Hakan Ünsal kicked a ball in Rivaldo's direction as he stood. FIFA later fined Rivaldo $11,000 for simulation. It was simulation, calculated, deliberate. But it tells you something about this man that pure admiration cannot. He had spent years watching the machine operate, watching it decide who received protection and who didn't, who was amplified and who was filed away. And in the highest pressure tournament of his career, with Brazil's group stage path hanging on a disciplinary decision, he used the machine's own logic, just once, against itself. It was not admirable, but it was human, and this story has always been about a human being, not a monument. Against Belgium in the round of 16, he scored the 2nd goal, a left-foot strike from outside the area that gave the goalkeeper no angle, no decision, and no chance. Against England in the quarter-final, he played the 60-yard pass that split their defence open like a seam. In the semi-final against Turkey, he struck the 1st goal, a low, precise drive across Rüştü Reçber that set Brazil on the path to the final. Rivaldo, 2002 World Cup, 5 goals, 3 assists, tournament's 2nd top scorer. Ronaldo scored 2 in the final against Germany. His name went into history. Rivaldo has spoken about 2002 obliquely in interviews rarely translated into English. He described it not as the greatest moment of his career, but as confirmation of something he had understood for a long time, that he played the game for the game, and that the game's institutions played for something else entirely. He stood on the podium in Yokohama, said almost nothing to the press. Ronaldo wept. The cameras stayed on Ronaldo. Rivaldo had built the platform. He had scored the goals in every round that kept Brazil alive long enough for Ronaldo's redemption to be possible. That is not diminishment, that is fact. Brazil won. Rivaldo stood on that podium holding a medal from a country that had spent years debating whether he deserved to be there. The boos had stopped, temporarily. After the World Cup, the erasure became official. He left Barcelona, he moved to AC Milan, not a small move. AC Milan in 2002 were the reigning European champions. Carlo Ancelotti's squad, Maldini anchoring the backline, Shevchenko at centre-forward, Kaká arriving, one of the greatest club sides the modern game had assembled, and yet football treated the arrival of the reigning World Cup winner and former FIFA World Player of the Year as peripheral news. The Italian press were already constructing Kaká's ascent, writing about Shevchenko's goals. The narrative architecture of that Milan side did not include Rivaldo at its centre, because he would not perform the role of protagonist in someone else's production. He was there as quality, as depth, without a story attached. He played 42 games across all competitions in his first season. Milan won the Champions League final against Juventus on penalties at Old Trafford. He held a European Cup, the only major honour he had not yet claimed. Rivaldo, AC Milan 2002-2003, Champions League winner, 42 appearances, one line in the history books. The post-match photographs do not centre him. The commemorations in the press were built around other names. He had done it again, arrived, contributed, won, and the machine had processed his contribution into the background of someone else's monument. After Milan, the geography of his career tells the rest of the story. Cruzeiro, Olympiacos, AEK Athens, Bunyodkor in Uzbekistan, Kabuskorp in Angola. He kept playing until he was 42 years old, not because the offers were the best available, but because football was still the only conversation he was interested in having. No global ambassador role, no retrospective series commissioned by a federation, no commercial narrative built around what he had actually achieved. He retired in 2015. There was no global send-off, no testimonial at Camp Nou, no special FIFA ceremony. The same quiet that had defined his career defined its end. Here is what we are left with. 3 Ballon d'Or podium finishes, FIFA World Player of the Year, La Liga's most celebrated hat-trick on its most consequential stage, a World Cup won with 5 goals across every knockout round, from the group stage to the final, a Champions League medal, career totals that place him in the upper echelon of Brazilian football history, and a legacy that exists primarily as a footnote to other people's stories. The question this documentary began with, how does the greatest player in the world become invisible in the country that made him, has an answer. But the answer is not about football, it is about narrative, about which stories the machine selects, about which faces it decides to amplify, which silences it decides to fill with meaning, and which achievements it quietly files away because they belong to someone unwilling to perform gratitude for the privilege of being great. Rivaldo was not invisible because he was quiet. He was invisible because the machine required noise, and he refused to provide it. Football didn't forget Rivaldo by accident, it chose to. And the next time you watch a genius perform in silence, in the background of someone else's redemption arc, ask yourself who is making that decision. Because it was never the crowd,